So even though a lot of these movies are a decade or older, I will have to put a spoiler alert because some people, they just don't want to be spoiled. But in the end, these movies are old enough. It's not my fault if you haven't seen them yet. But without further ado, you've been warned, so proceed if you want to.
Well, hock to you too.
Stop! Fucking stop!
I'll see myself out. I'm just kidding. Welcome back to Austination. It's been a minute, but I've regrouped and I'm ready to go. And I had promised before I had taken the break that I was going to go through my 10 favorite movies of all time. I want to say, before I get into this list, this is not necessarily my list of the top 10 movies of all time, just favorites I've had growing up over the years. Now, to meet criteria for this list, this movie has to be 10 years or older. I don't want to pick movies from 2018, 2019, 2017, or even last year that came out, because I feel like it's not fair to judge them as my favorites when I have so many from my childhood or my teenage years that I still absolutely love and enjoy, even if some of them may have not have aged the best. So there, that is out of the way. I don't want to hear anybody go, whoa, how do you have this movie on a top 10 list even though it's not one of the greatest movies of all time? Doesn't have to be. This is just my personal favorite list, and we are going in no particular order, so let's just get it started, shall we? The Dark Knight. I mean, I'm just gonna kind of gloss over this one because everybody knows it's my favorite movie, but this came out in 2008. I can't believe it's been 16 years. I remember being super hyped for this thing when it came out in the theaters, especially after the ending of Batman Begins, when Commissioner Gordon hands Batman the Joker card. You just knew you were in for a treat. And even though I think this is one of the worst movies to kind of depict Batman, even though Christian Bale does a good job, the voice gets worse.
I'm not wearing hockey pads.
It's Heath Ledger's performance as the Joker that just carries this thing all the way through. He's so menacing and probably even darker than what Jack Nicholson's had, because even Jack Nicholson's depiction had a more comic book leaning tinge to it. With Heath Ledger's, this is just straight up psychopath, and I love the hell out of it. And even when you look at it 16 years later, it's still aged like a fine wine and is seen as one of the best superhero movies of all time. Next up on the list, this might shock a few people, but I have Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. This is another movie that I don't know, I could never get enough of. It's so fun, and I mean, I love Michael Cera. What more can I say? Michael Cera is just so much fun. He's in a lot of fun movies, and I think this character fits him well. Plus, Mary Elizabeth Winstead is so badass in this too. The action scenes are amazing. I've never read, like, I think this is obviously based off of, like, comics and stuff. Never read the comics or anything, but I can tell you from the movie, I think I would enjoy reading some. Maybe I should start reading some now, or maybe I'm too late to the party at this point. But this one's another excellent classic that I think became a cult classic, as it really didn't gain the recognition it did till after its theatrical release. Alright, so this next one I kind of cheated because it's 3 movies in one, but this entire trilogy has just been around for my whole childhood into my adulthood, and it never, ever gets old, and that is Sam Raimi's Spider-Man trilogy, Spider-Man 1, 2, and yes, even 3. I pointed at them wrong. Spider-Man 3 is right here.
You're so dumb. You are really dumb. For real.
But Spider-Man 1, instant classic. Tobey Maguire's introduction as Spider-Man and Willem Dafoe as the Green Goblin makes it even scarier depiction. Spider-Man 2, again, one of the greatest comic book movies of all time, just takes an interesting Spider-Man comic story and does it justice, and it does it justice in a different way. And even Spider-Man 3, for as goofy and as, I guess you can say, tampered with as it feels, it's just become, again, such a cult classic that I feel like when you look at it as a finisher to the trilogy, it's kind of, a little bit of a weak finish, but it was never intended to be the finish as they were looking to make Spider-Man 4, but because of the backstabbing of Sam Raimi from Sony, he decided to quit, and they just rebranded the franchise altogether. But nowadays, people look at this and go, this isn't necessarily as bad as people made it out to be. Is it as good as 1 and 2? No, but most third movies in the franchise aren't the best. So for what it's worth, I think it's fine. Plus, it's the only time we got to see black-suited Spider-Man, and we get one of the most iconic, most memed scenes of all time when he's just enjoying himself dancing down the street and kind of, you know, getting a little like, hey ladies, what's up? Like, it's just so fun and funny, and I think that part there encapsulates what Tobey Maguire brought to the role in itself. But nonetheless, the trilogy, it just has a place in my heart, and I don't think there will ever be a Spider-Man trilogy as good or fun as that one was, and I'm a fan of the new trilogy as well, so that's saying a lot. Alright, enough of the comic book movies. We now have some movies that, well, are very musical. And what do I mean by that? Well, one is a biopic. Now, biopics for me are very hit or miss because, you know, it's not necessarily something that I think every famous person needs. But with Johnny Cash and I Walk the Line, this thing has always stuck with me because I remember this came out literally, 2005, like a couple years after he passed away, and Joaquin Phoenix in the role as young Johnny Cash, you didn't really think it would fit so well, but when you watch the movie it does, and he trains so much to be able to, you know, sing like Johnny Cash for the movie. Reese Witherspoon as June Carter is also another great casting that I think it's underappreciated. This movie in itself just shows us the tumultuous, you know, early life of Johnny Cash and how he handled the fame back when he got popular in the 1950s. It's just, I can't really explain it other than it's a great biographical film, and I think a lot of biopics that are made nowadays should learn from this one, as yes, most of the time biopics aren't necessarily 100% accurate, but with this one you understand that, you know, Johnny Cash has these problems, and of course it doesn't necessarily paint him as like the good guy throughout the whole movie. I mean, you know, there's movies out there where it's like, oh, they were perfect and did nothing wrong, it was everybody around them, even though they may have done these bad things. This actually goes and depicts, you know, Johnny Cash and his involvement in, you know, alcoholism, cheating on June Carter. I mean, it goes through a little bit of everything, but it's just an excellent movie that I would recommend people watch if they haven't seen it already. Next is an absolute favorite of mine when it comes to Jack Black. Now, Jack Black is one of those actors where you kind of, he's got movies that are really good, and then he's got movies where you kind of like, yeah, I don't know if I fuck with this. You know, most recently Kung Fu Panda 4 came out. Obviously, he voices the panda in that movie, which I believe that his name's Poe. I'm sorry, I've only ever seen the first one, that was years ago, so I'm not necessarily caught up on the franchise. And then, of course, there's other films that become cult classics, like one that I wanted to put on here, but was kind of like, yeah, we'll leave it off. That being Tenacious D and the Pick of Destiny, where Jack Black and his bandmate Kyle Gass create this fictitious way that the band had formed and kind of takes you through their first adventures together. The movie I decided to pick was actually a couple years before Tenacious D and the Pick of Destiny, and that is School of Rock. This is one even Jack Black will tell you is his finest work to date, not only because it really fit him so well, but for what it did with music teaching in schools after this. I mean, it just, like, I feel like he was showing you how underappreciated music is in schools and how they should teach it more to the youth because it can be so powerful and it could bring people together. I mean, this story is about Jack Black, who plays, obviously, a former rock and roll star who got kicked out of his band. He's trying to win Battle of the Bands, but he also needs money to pay rent for his friend because his girlfriend is saying, look, at some point in time you have to kick him out because he's behind on rent. So he decides, since his buddy is a substitute teacher, when a school gets a call for him to substitute, Jack Black's character Dewey goes, wait, so it's a substitute job, right? How much do you pay? And he pretends to be his friend, takes the job himself, and what seems to be a science class, English class, they never specify what kind of class he's going to teach, he ends up turning them into a music class and a band that they form together in the Battle of the Bands, which they actually don't win, they lose. It's one of those rare occasions in movies where the people that you're cheering for to do well actually don't, as Jack Black's old band does end up winning the whole thing, but kind of, you know, just out of spite, because by the end of it, everybody loves the School of Rock and they're cheering for them, and even though they lost, everybody's on their side, everybody loves them, and even the kids' parents who, were shunning them for playing music, all of a sudden they're like, oh, so this is your true passion, you're really good at it, everybody becomes accepting, and even Jack Black's character by the end of it's like, we didn't win, but all in all, when you're making music, it's not about the awards. It's about the passion that you put into it. And by the end of it, he's able to create his own school where he and his former rock and roll buddy now teach kids the way of music. It's just a nice family comedy that I think everybody can enjoy. Jack Black's not too obnoxious in this film. I think that's some people's complaints that sometimes he can be too obnoxious. But in this one, he's just right, and I couldn't see anybody else doing this better. So School of Rock forever will stay in my heart even at this point, 20, 21 years later? And you guys know I'm a sports fan. So I do have some sports movies too that I absolutely love. The first one being Moneyball. Now, Moneyball is an interesting film about the 2002 Oakland Athletics. Now, what is Moneyball, you might ask? Well, see, in most sports, like football and basketball, there's a thing called a salary cap where each team, based upon the contracts that they have handed out, have a certain amount of money to spend each year, and that can go up or down depending on, what kind of contracts you're handing out, who you're cutting, who you're signing. But in baseball, it's a little bit different. They don't have a salary cap. They have what you call a payroll. And basically the payroll is taken from the revenue that you've made from whatever it might be, ticket sales or whatever the owner pitches into you, and that's how much money you have to spend in the off season before you get to a luxury tax. And when you're a more smaller market team, when you're not the Yankees or Dodgers or even the Mets, there are teams that tend to kind of not necessarily cheat the system a little bit, but cheap out and try to win in different ways, and that being more analytical. As most of the time when people think baseball, they're like, oh, you need guys that hit home runs and, pitch very well, get strikeouts, but that's not always the case. You gotta get on base to score more runs, and you gotta get hit in certain situations that can lead to more runs other than just hitting a home run all time. And Brad Pitt plays Billy Beane, at the time Oakland Athletics general manager, who started to use this formula around this time, as even after making the playoffs in 2001 and almost the World Series, the team had to cut down on payroll and let some of their star players go. So to replace those players, Billy Beane looks at analytics and says, well, we don't necessarily have to spend money to get these guys, so even though they may not be, great or as great as the players we let go, these guys can definitely do the job. And it goes through a team that won 103 games somehow despite having the cheapest payroll in the league, even though they do kind of gloss over that they did have a really good pitching rotation. That's neither here nor there. It just kind of takes you through the life of a team with low payroll and how they go about doing things differently than other teams that can go out and spend money. It's very interesting. It's not, again, very super realistic, but it's a nice watch that I would recommend to people who aren't even sports fans to kind of give you more of an understanding as to why certain teams spend the way they do and why some don't and prefer using the analytical ways of doing things. I mean, this Oakland Athletics team in 2002 changed the way teams started to run their baseball team, as it's more analytical than ever, and they rely on analytics to kind of decide what players to keep, what players to let go. So this movie kind of shows you how it all began. Rest in peace, Chadwick Boseman. Just 42, the Jackie Robinson story, where the late great Chadwick Boseman plays Jackie Robinson. This is another biopic that is just excellent. I mean, obviously, they say the N-word a lot, but you gotta think this is about the first black player to play in Major League Baseball, the guy that broke the color barrier, so of course he was hearing a lot of racial things thrown at him, and ironically enough, the teams were also trying to kill him by throwing baseballs at him at a fast rate because, well, they just couldn't accept the fact that a black man was playing their sport. Harrison Ford's in this movie. He plays the Dodgers owner that signed Jackie Robinson. It just kind of takes you through what he went through and even what the team went through itself. I mean, there was a scene in the movie where Pee Wee Reese, a player on the Brooklyn Dodgers at the time, not Los Angeles Dodgers, went into the owner's office and said, hey, I'm getting this note being called this and that because I'm defending Jackie Robinson and all that, and they're saying that they're gonna, harm my family. To which Harrison Ford then points out this little drawer with files in it that has hundreds upon hundreds of notes that were sent to him and other players about Jackie Robinson and how if you support this man, we're going to come and we're going to hurt you, we're going to hurt your family and all that. And Harrison Ford just kind of says, look, I didn't make this publicly to be loved or hated. I just saw a baseball player who is really good at what he does, and I wanted him to be on this team, and that was that. And by the end of it, there's that scene where Pee Wee Reese has his arm wrapped around Jackie Robinson, everybody's booing Jackie, calling him the N-word, and Pee Wee just kind of looks at him and he goes,
maybe tomorrow we'll all wear 42. That way they won't tell us apart.
And lo and behold, in 1996, the MLB made the number 42, Jackie Robinson's number, retired throughout the whole league, meaning that nobody on any of the 30 teams could wear his number except for one day, that being in April, where it's Jackie Robinson Day, where every single player dons the number 42, and they get to honor his legacy for what he did for the game. Then we have a fictitious movie about a real baseball team who, at the time when this came out, wasn't really a good baseball team or didn't necessarily have a good history up until this point. Major League, the movie about the Cleveland Indians, who are a real baseball team. They're called the Cleveland Guardians now, but this isn't like, a history of a season that they had. This is a fictitious baseball team that is put together here, as the owner of the team doesn't like Cleveland, so she intentionally lets everybody go to try to create this bad baseball team so the MLB will be forced to move them to Miami. But with this group of misfits from Todd Berenger, Charlie Sheen, Corbin Brenson, and Wesley Snipes, they end up coming together and realizing, like, hey, this woman doesn't want us to win, but we want to win. We're baseball players here. And with the power of friendship, they end up going to the playoffs for the first time in a long time. And then the sequel was made. That one was also really good, because you're thinking, well, how could they do the same story again? Well, this time around, it's basically the same group of misfits, but they all kind of lose what they were good at. Like with Charlie Sheen's character, he lost control of his pitches and was kind of just not feeling confident anymore. And with, I was going to say Wesley Snipes' character, but he wasn't in the second one. Willie Mays Hayes, that's who Wesley Snipes played, and then it was played by a different actor in the second movie. He realizes, oh, I'm supposed to be the typical leadoff hitter, get on base, so why am I trying to hit a home run every time I'm coming up to bat? Because it's obviously not working. They find a way, even the second time around, to make it more fun, and by the end of the second movie, Cleveland is going to the World Series, so it even ups that ante of, well, okay, at the end you saw them clinch a playoff spot, well, now at the end of this one, you're going to see them clinch a trip to the World Series. But the first one is definitely the better of the two, for the sheer fact that it's just, a bunch of these unknown characters that you come to love throughout, and you get to see them come together and do their thing and win. And even though it's fictitious, it just feels so nice. And the last movie we are going to talk about that is in a beautiful steel book is Alfred Hitchcock's 1960 movie, Psycho. This was kind of like the first of its kind when you talk about slasher films, and unlike a lot of other slashers where they rely on blood and gore and these fancy kills, this movie doesn't really do that. You don't really see a lot of people get killed outside of the opening character in the shower scene, played by Jamie Lee Curtis's mother. And you see one of the detectives get killed when they're going to the Bates Motel, and they find the owner of the place there who is basically talking to his mother, and then the mother comes out and stabs him to death. Or was it really the guy's mother after all, as we find out by the end of it that this whole time the owner is his mother, because he is dressing up as her, because he is this crazy kind of psychopath who, it's almost kind of like how Jason Voorhees can, just see his mom out of nowhere because he had that attachment and whatever. This guy had this attachment to his mom that he may or may not have killed, and he kind of takes on her persona to kill other people as they're trying to figure out who killed the woman in the beginning of the movie. Like, it does start slow, but once you get to the Bates Motel stuff, it definitely gets good, and Alfred Hitchcock is able to just use suspense to his advantage like he always seemed to do. Plus, the soundtrack is just absolutely iconic. I mean, even during the shower scene when the shower curtains get ripped open and you see the killer with a knife in their hand, everybody knows that sound nowadays. They use it for when something creepy happens. And this really started to kickstart the slasher genre, as in the 70s we got Halloween, in the 80s we got Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street, and it just kept picking up then and there, and without this movie, I don't know if the slasher genre would have ever became accepting as it did. So there you have it. There you go. Those are my top 10 favorite movies. Not of all time, just, I guess, from my childhood, or just movies that I've grown up with that I can still sit down and watch and still enjoy and not get bored of or tired of. There is a couple honorable mentions here, as I had to just show off these bad boys here. We have Toy Story 1 and Toy Story 2 on the original VHS. I don't know how many of you know what VHSs are, but yes, I still have these, they still work, and these are still fantastic movies in itself. Two classics that can never be beaten, and that goes to show why 3 and 4 were so underwhelming to me, because these two are just so great that no matter what they tried to do after that, it just seemed like they couldn't do it. But that's it for me. Would really like to hear in the comments below what your favorite movies are. Like I said, doesn't necessarily have to be what you think the best are. Just movies that you have a certain, certain feelings for a reason, whether it's you grew up with it or it's just something, that just sticks with you that much. Like it had so much of a meaning or an impact that you never get enough of it. When you do watch it, you can just watch it 100 times over and never get bored of it. But until then, that's it for me. Stay safe out there, and I will catch you all in the next one.